So thank you everyone for joining CABAA Safety Committee's second webinar of the year. We are very excited to have Greg Farley here with us today. Greg Farley, he's a pilot for John Deere. He's done extensive research and experience for aviation safety, fatigue, and health risk management. And he's a big advocate in encouraging aviation departments to expand on their considerations and protocols for health and aviation. It's a big topic that's becoming bigger each day, and we're very happy to get the industry aligned with the realistic version of what's out there today. So we are thrilled to have Greg with us to present. Just to let everybody know, there will be some opportunities where there will be feedback requested during the webinar, at which point feel free to unmute yourself and contribute. But any questions that come up during the webinar, please just enter them into the chat box that you'll see on the top right corner if you're on a computer, actually on both computer and iPad, and I will ask all the questions at the end. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Greg.
Thank you very much. I hope audio is good. Can you hear me?
Sorry.
All right, great. So welcome everybody. Thank you for joining. I'm Greg Farley. I've been at John Deere as a pilot and sitting in various levels of safety manager for the last 16 years at John Deere. So where this story really what I want to talk about today is mental health, and we're going to expand this to be mental skills, mental wellness, but how can we address this from a flight department standpoint, and operationally, what can we do to facilitate people being in good mental state for flying? So first, I'm not going to give any medical advice or make any diagnosis over mental health conditions. And really the basis of our story is, if we look at the number line on the bottom, is that mental health really kind of resides, and our wellness resides on a scale. And this is a sliding scale based on many factors that go into our day. And so typically, if we're sitting at a 1 or 2, because we're in aviation, we're probably closer to 2 every day, but we have all these other forces that come into play, and we'll talk about those in a little bit. But we're on the sliding scale, and we vary up to 4s and 5s, and where we start getting into the very, the clinical needing expert mental health care is when we're getting up into the 8s and the 9s, and that's where medical certification for pilots can start to become an issue, or to worry, which then compounds the issue. So what we're really going to be talking about is how can we build a program that addresses that mental health events and crisis may occur, but how do we give tools and resources available to keep us from ever getting into the 5s and 6s, or if we do, how do we get back to the 2? So a little bit more about me. It may seem weird that I give you my last career. I was a paramedic. I started my first ambulance call was pretty close to my 18th birthday as a senior in high school. Granted, I was observing. I was only an EMT student at the time. And I worked as a street paramedic for both this local area and then the city and county of Denver for a good number of years. So I've seen lots of mental health, both as 911 calls, and unfortunately, I've seen lots of mental health with my former partners and people that I worked with, including several deaths by suicide. So I came to aviation after that, and I started working in kind of around 2014 when fatigue risk management became an issue. Really captivated me. I got pulled in on that. I had a hard time sleeping anyway, so it made a good opportunity for me to try and how I prove myself. And then I built our fatigue risk management plan in about 2014 here at the flight department. I joined the NBAA on the safety committee, and I began talking about fatigue risk management. And one of the things that was really difficult was you couldn't talk about the side effects of fatigue without addressing mental health, because there is a correlation. And so the topic of mental health really kind of began to grow out of that. And I lost a very dear friend somebody I had worked with to death by suicide, and I kind of said enough's enough, and I've taken a much more stronger stance on mental health and began speaking about that both for NBAA and in webinars. Then during COVID, my name got out there a little bit and I started working and talking a little bit more about mental health. I've worked with Dr. Quay Snyder quite a bit, and other providers that we'll get to towards the end. So one of the things I want to do is let's take a safety management system approach to addressing mental health, mental wellness, and mental skills. And there's a reason for this, and I'm going to tell you that this really belongs as a component of a safety management system, but let's take a look at this first. So we're going to identify, is there a hazard even present? And then does this hazard pose a risk to the department? And then we'll go through a risk matrix, and then we'll start working on our mitigations. And I will ask for some feedback. So have your chats up, be ready to provide some feedback, please. So first thing, the mental game. Aviation has always been a mental game, but it just seems that it's even more complex now than it used to be. You know, within just, we have non-standard work duties, cycles, schedules, the stresses and disruptions of being away from family, and then you know, it's not just that we're away, but then there's stress that gets imposed on us. The application of complex regulations, and you know, if you remember, the regulations keep getting more complex, especially if you're doing international travel. But even immediately following COVID, I mean, there were all these very specific guidelines that even varied within the United States about flying, and we're the ones that are responsible for knowing all that, and that stress gets put on and compounded. We also have company policies. We have the complexity of aircraft systems. I mean, if we just look at how much information is displayed to a pilot at any given minute now, with the advent of technology, it's really difficult to fathom. And then we also have to sit next to somebody most of the time if we're flying as a crew, and that crew could be just 2 or it could be up to 5. And so anything that is going on in their worlds and their lives also gets added to our distractions and our ability. So, but then there's a problem. FAA says no distractions, can't be distracted to be a pilot, but then there's medical barriers to pilots getting help and to how to offload. And we can talk about that a little bit when we get into the EP discussion. And then even just in general, there are barriers to getting care. The mental health system is struggling, and lots of people are having trouble finding even a provider. So let's look at the hazard. And the way I think we do this is we'll start with the general population. So these are just some quick facts taken from the CDC's website. So it's a little, the CDC is kind of sometimes a little conservative compared to some of the others, but I thought it at least identifies that there is a hazard present. So within the last 2 weeks, and this was from 2019 prior to COVID, 15% of adults experienced symptoms of anxiety disorder within the previous 2 weeks, and that was anything from mild to moderate cases. We have, and this kind of starts to reflect on COVID, the increase in mental health treatment over the last 2 years from 19 to 21. They did do a study looking at anxiety and depressive disorder as a result of COVID, and again, we see a substantial increase. And then death by suicide is up now about 14.5 per 100,000. So in general, there is a hazard present it is mental health. So now there's a lot of studies that have gone out in aviation, and these are kind of all by the author of the study and the year that they were performed. But what we can see is that there is a risk to aviation as well. And when you're looking at some of these numbers, if you're applying conservative numbers and saying 5%, 10%, most of the flight departments, that is one person at least that is within that department that is affected by this. And then even if you look at this, we're not just concerned about our flight department, but we have families, and our families have friends. And so this is present in our everyday life. So my question to you is, real quick, what do we think the likelihood is? I mean, if we're looking at this, we know that it exists. The studies from that affect or directly at aviation do show that there is a likelihood within a flight department for there to be some sort of need for mental health intervention, mental skills, or so. So you could say that this is a 2 or a 3, but it's definitely not a 1, right? It's not unlikely that it will occur. So when we're looking across the severity, catastrophic is more in the German wings and the horizon area, but where we're trying to focus today is identifying, providing tools and resources to keep it from being catastrophic. But even when we get into employment of our people, if we have good employees, we want them to feel good and to feel safe and to be able to make sure that they're getting provided for. And we'll get into some of the mental skills and mindfulness exercises that can help. I think that was even on the previous slide, that it reduced burnout when you have a good mental skills and mindful program. So we want to keep this into the negligible range, right? So that even though that we know this is occurring, but we're giving people tools and resources that if it starts to occur and they're approaching the 3 and the 4s, that they have the tools that are built into themselves, or that they have resources through peer support programs or other programs to help them get back to the 2 or 3, and we don't get into the burnout or the pilot or the person that you're working with that is just the one that's complaining all the time and just completely just, I call them black holes of happiness, right? You fly with them and they just kind of suck the happiness right out of the cockpit or the flight deck, sorry. So the first steps would be to identify what resources are available to your company or to your flight department. And some of these, the best place to start is internal. Most companies now have an employee assistance program. Our numbers on the back of our insurance card, and you can start there. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. It's not always that's where you want to go to get help. The people that work in aviation are very reluctant to go to an EAP and get actual help from the EAP, but they do provide a plethora of other services, and we'll get to that when we get into the training. Also look at what does your short-term and long-term disability plans cover. Do they address mental health, right? I mean, mental health in general, being diagnosed with depression, is most of the other population can come back to work the next day. But if you're in aviation, especially certificated pilot, depression may not mean that you can return to work right away. So what is available in short-term and long-term disability? And then also, once you've identified that, then we'll start looking at external resources. And I will talk more about that as we start building out the mitigations. And really the change starts with leadership. So as the leader of the department, as the leader of the company, as the accountable executive signing that safety policy, it starts there. And it needs the conversation needs to begin. And yes, I did use the word vulnerable. And what does that really mean? Well, I've seen lots of definitions on vulnerability, but what it really means is having the courage to act. It also means having compassion for others. And that's really what it means. And also authenticity. And so that just means as a leader, you just need to be courageous and start this conversation. Have an authentic conversation. Maybe this hasn't affected you, but you want to know how it affects others. Make sure that people feel comfortable in coming forward, just like we say in safety management system, that there's a just culture. And then demonstrate compassion. The other first step is develop a pre-plan. What are we going to do? What are you going to do as a flight department, whether it's somebody comes forward that, hey, they've got some marital problems at home, maybe they've lost a loved one. What are you going to do if they decompensate during a training event? What are you going to do if they show up and they're actually having a mental health crisis or a mental health emergency? How are you going to handle that? And, I've been a paramedic for well over 27, 28 years, heart attacks, trauma, I knew what to do. Mental health crisis, the only thing I could do there was get them in the ambulance, talk to them, and get them to the professional help, because it is scary. And they need help. But the other thing there, and notice I said the ambulance, because there are many other things that could be causing that. You could have a diabetic issue, you could have a stroke. So if somebody's behavior is that altered, get a professional there to make the decisions about what we need to do for care. And the other step, start reflecting this in your safety policy. How is safety policy going to address mental health, mental wellness. And just like we do fitness for duty and medical certification, let's start addressing mental health and the safety policy. And we'll get into how you can address that or what you can be listing as the resources available. This one's so much better when we're in person because I would ask everybody to stand up, start stretching because we're going to go for a run. And I get lots of balks when I do that. And so the point is just as if we were going to go for a run, we would want to be conditioned and prepared to go for that run. We've demonstrated that flying is very much a mental exercise and requires a high level of mental skill in every day that we do. So we need to be conditioned. We need to be trained. We need to have tools and resources at our disposal to know how to continue past the hurdles and obstacles that present on a day-to-day basis. So here are some of the tools that a flight department can add. A mental skills program. There are several different providers out there that are doing a mental skills program, but find one. EAPs are, there may very well be a mental skills program within your EAP. But what these can do is help mindfulness, and mindfulness does work. It helps to train your mind on how you process information, and sometimes it's okay to react, but sometimes we need to get past that reaction. And how do we stop storytelling? How do we stop living in the past? Because those do put blinders, or they do put lenses on how we're viewing everything else that occurs subsequent. They also improve mental performance and mental resilience. So when we're looking at a mental skills program, even if we're not concerned about how this progresses into mental health, you increase the emotional intelligence of employees. You give them better abilities to contribute and how to react when things aren't going the best in the department. We're all in aviation and we're always concerned about what tomorrow is going to hold. So that's where a mental skills program can come in. It also works with how to handle family disruptions and other things. Coaching and mentoring. There's a lot. I've worked with lots of coaches and they're just phenomenal. They really do help to improve emotional intelligence. They can help you have perspective on current events that are going on, but they also can teach you and give you the tools for how to get perspective at a later time, even after the coaching session ends. And that's where some of those emotional tools can come in, such as, looking at what energy level you're doing, how are your thoughts affecting your feelings and affecting your actions, and what do we need to change? Because those things all come into play in how we are going to bring ourselves into getting into that airplane. The 121 world uses a peer support program. It's a little tough in the smaller corporate world. Some of the interest that we've seen is even from larger groups like NBAA, larger regional associations developing a peer support group that really is much larger than a single department. And what this does is it provides that resource that, hey, if the individual is going through a challenge, or maybe they just got something at work that they're not sure how to process, how to take, they got family disruptions, they've got a kid that's not doing well in school and they're gone on a trip, that's where this peer support group can come into play, because it helps give you to talk to someone else. You can get a little perspective. You also, when you're talking, you're unloading, you're letting that off your plate. And then it also can help you know that you're not alone. And then that can help that progression down that scale until maybe you get into a better program like a flight department assistance program, which we're going to talk about next, or getting with the coach. So peer support program, the airlines have had tremendous success with this. It's just been hard to build out in our small world of corporate and 135. The other is a flight department assistance program. These started as a pilot assistance program, or PDAP. We've kind of worked to try and change it to where this is really affecting everybody in the department. Our safety management system covers everybody in a flight department, so should the flight department assistance program. And there's training available through some of these programs. They're typically tailored to your department and what your needs are and how you've laid things out in your safety policy. And then also most of the providers in a flight department assistance program are aviation professionals. So they know what it means to be flying that line. They know what it means to be in Europe when the water heater quits and your wife and kids or your spouse and kids are stranded and you feel helpless. They know what it's like, and they're going to give you advice along those lines. Because the other concern to aviators is when we go to an EAP or go to other programs that don't understand aviation, is they see it as a job. And aviation is a livelihood that we've chosen, and we work in it. And changing a livelihood, that's part of where we end up in trouble with medical certification. We want to stay in aviation. So how are we going to make everything else work so that we can stay in aviation, so we can keep flying the planes, we can keep servicing them on the ground, we can keep scheduling them? How are we going to make this work so that we can keep doing these things? And that's where a flight department assistance program really comes in, is because they understand that that's not a variable, that's a constant. We're staying in aviation. Now how do we fix everything else? And then when we get up past the 8s and the 9s to where we get into needing more professional help, that's where you can get into counselors, psychologists, and psychiatrists. So the other question comes up, well, how do I know? How do I know when someone needs help? Well, there's 3 things: change in behavior, a change in performance, and a change in reliability. If somebody was good, if you had a great employee that had a great attitude every day they came in, and all of a sudden they've changed, something is going on with that employee. Maybe it's medical, maybe it is mental health, maybe they have family problems. There's something going on with that employee, and we need to get them back to being that employee they were prior to this event, because they were a good employee. So we need to get them back to that. So if we look at this, why I think this belongs in a safety management system is the SMS is already recording performance, right? We're collecting safety reports, ASAP reports, EFOCA data. We're collecting that data. The other is that you do have scheduling software, and we can look at reliability in the SMS data too, right? Late departures, maybe sick calls, constant schedule swaps, stuff along those lines can indicate a change in reliability. Now, the one we don't see is a change in behavior. But so where does the change in behavior typically lead? To performance reviews then, right? Hey, you're not doing good. You've had this change in your behavior. And so it starts becoming punitive. And so if we move this into the safety management system, some of these change in behaviors, change in performance, and change in reliabilities can be protected under that safety policy, so long as the person is working towards getting help and to being better. Moving back, it still doesn't answer the question of, hey, I just showed up to fly the line and so-and-so said they're going through a divorce, or their significant other just left them today. What do I do with that? Well, it's tough. And but if somebody were standing there saying, I'm having a heart attack, but I'm good to fly, or I'm having crushing chest pain, I'm good to go, don't worry. We say, no, you're not. So why is it that when it comes to events that affect our ability to process mental events, mental skills, and our mental wellness, why is it that we let somebody make the determination that they're good to go? And it is fear, right? We don't want to do anything that would put a medical in. We don't want to violate the trust of others. So that's where it gets really nuanced, and that's where developing this program, developing a pre-plan, and protecting people with a policy comes into play. So what if it's more serious? Well, now we get up into the 8s and the 9s. Stand on your pre-plan and know what resources that are available, because that's where you're gonna end up, right? What do we need to do? Well, we've thought through this, right? We just like we've drilled everything else or emergency response drill. We do CPR, we do cabin first aid and medical emergencies. Let's have a pre-plan and let's know what to do. The other is the questions should always be, what can I do? What do you need from us? What do you need from me? That's that compassion and authenticity part of being vulnerable, right? Don't make them feel that they're burdening you. Get them the help that they need, and then we figure it out. So the FAA, then you get into navigating the FAA. And I'm going to try and switch to a video. Dr. Susan Northrup is really just leading change in this. This has been a huge adventure to be on. because at first we were like, okay, we need the FAA to address this. We need the FAA to address this. Well, she's already doing that, and she's making huge strides. I think there's a lot of changes that are going to come um, with her at the helm of the FAA on getting help beyond just the EAPs. So if you don't mind, I'll play this video. Just 1 second. Oh wait, we didn't get audio, right? So we'll drop the link for the video into the chat so you guys can watch it. It's great. It's about 1 minute and 24 seconds long, but she's talking about it, and she's still speaking from an FAA standpoint. But look at what else she's done, and there's a lot of changes that are coming from the FAA. So be patient. But in the end, your life, your health, and your happiness, getting the help that you need and unburdening the what you've been struggling with will be a huge improvement. There may be other areas in aviation that you can work if you can't fly, or maybe it's just a temporary treatment. Hopefully the FAA starts kind of moving in that direction to where some of these things aren't as foreboding or end of career as they were. The FAA allows depression to get a certificate under a waiver. There's a couple meds that you can even take. There's talks on anxiety, there's talks on some of these others, and even PTSD, but nothing has actually been written into the rule books yet. So some of the external resources, companies, and there's a lot out there. Lift Effect is one. They help with a flight department assistance program. It's kind of more of a coaching, mentoring, mental skills program. And then you have Aviation Medical Advisory, and there are some articles that they have. They also list out meds that you can take, and then you can also call them for advice. Convergent Performance, they do a lot with mental skills, and I know that they're putting out a program. I believe it is a mental skills program. Presage Group, the NBAA, and other local groups like CABAA are working hard in this area. And then there's some online coaching programs. Better Up Coaching or Better Up Training is one of them. And then external training programs. I know and this leads me back to the EAP. I know when we were looking at the EAP before, we always thought, well, you just call and you get a counselor, and that's where you go if you have family matters or so is what the FAA typically allows. But the EAP, ours gave us this whole course book, and in there was mental health fundamentals for managers, mental health fundamentals for employees, substance use disorder for managers, substance use disorder for employees, this whole list of programs that they provided as training to help people understand what is going on. The other external trainings is a program. There's what they call QPR training. It's suicide awareness and prevention. You can actually get a certification in that, much like you do CPR. And then other companies like Convergent, they offer all these other training programs as well. And the best one to do is whatever resources that or service providers you have, just talk to them, ask your SMS provider, ask your insurance provider, ask questions about what they can do to help build these programs, because a lot of people are wanting to do it. They're just not sure how to help yet. And that leads me to the questions.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Greg. Yeah, as you said, we're going to open it up to questions. So again, feel free to use the chat function to add in any questions that you think of. One of the ones that we got was, how do we think that chronic stress and chronic fatigue are contributing to mental health problems, and what can we do to mitigate that?
Yeah, and that's a good question. It kind of starts to walk on a borderline of more clinical, but a way it's kind of explained to me is, just think of it, everybody has a bucket, and everybody's bucket is a different size. And some people, their buckets already are half full of other things in the way that they what they bring to the table from their family life. And that bucket can only hold so much. And when we look at the world since COVID, stress is really just gone up a lot, right? And now we're looking at all these economic uncertainties, and in a business that is tied to the world, right? You're looking at conflict between these political forces and how that affects what we do. So it very much is. The buckets are full and they're sitting full. And so how do we handle this? And that's where some of these programs, even just running out and getting into a mental skills program, I've done 2 of them, just looking at the programs because I was asked to. Both were great, and I picked up stuff from them. To working with a coach, the FAA does allow you to work with an EAP for family matters, and to me, everything affects our family, right? So getting into those programs like a mental skills or coaching or mentoring program to help give perspective. I know the mental skills program focuses a lot on how to have conversations, how to frame events that are happening around you, and really how to identify the storytelling. Because when we're looking at storytelling, that's really an anxiety response. So we're concerned about the future, and we start saying, well, this happened, so this might happen, and this might happen. And so that's really kind of along those lines. And then when we're looking at depression, we're typically focused on the past. And that's where those mental skills programs can help you to identify when you've wandered into storytelling or reflecting on the past, and then also give you the resources on kind of how to stop it. One of the best tools, it's, sometimes you get really advice and you're like, oh, really? That seems overly simplistic, but okay, no. So like if you're going to storytell and you're going to think something bad's going to happen, for every bad thing you think of, you have to give an opposite story as well. And I was like, okay, that's silly, right? But it does work, right? Like, hey, if I'm worried about my job tomorrow, what happens if they make me CEO of the company tomorrow too, right? So if you're going to make up a story, make up a good one. And so those are some of the things. But having these programs, and until a flight department or a company really comes forward with it, it just maybe you have to go find the resources yourself. But that's where we're focusing on coaching, because you can get all the coaching and mental skills development that you can. So
that's great. Kind of tagging off of that is, how does workload contribute to mental wellness, and what are some practical changes we, like in an aviation department, can do to right that size of responsibility?
well, and that comes to that work-life balance, and how do we, and that's where even as a leader, you got to set that example. I was terrible at that example, right? I tell my team, when you're off, you're off. I don't want you doing things. And then what do? I'm going through emails at 9 o'clock at night. I'm working on Saturdays. I'm working on Sundays. I'm available 24/7. So even though my words were one thing, my actions were setting a different example. And there has to be a delineation. There has to be a cutoff from work. And you need to find, and it's not always easy, especially when workloads are super high. But that's where setting that example from the leader, and the leaders being understanding that, look, we just can't do everything every day. I kind of get to a point of 4 or 5 o'clock in my day. Now, if it's occasionally, if it's terribly important, that's one thing. But 4 or 5, my lid goes down on my computer, and I'll be available by phone if something pops up. But then it's time to be with my kids or my family and my friends. And I got to the point where I was sitting with my kids, and it was coming Sunday, and I don't remember what we did because I was thinking about work. I was thinking about too many other things. But that's where a mental skills program or a coach can help you build those tool sets for how do you change gears, and how do you set aside work and start engaging on personal life. Sleep is another one. Sleep needs to be a priority in your day.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Actually, following through on the turn it off, be done for the day, separate yourself from work. It's a hard thing to do, but once you do it, it can eliminate a lot of stress.
Especially if you have a hobby or events planned, right? Because then it's a little bit easier. Hey, we're going to dinner tonight, or it could just be, hey, we're cooking dinner tonight. Hey, we're going to watch this we're going to binge Netflix tonight as a family, and because then that gives you a task that you're going to do, and so it helps to say, no, I have to go do this. The other, I was going to speak on the sleep. It's when I started sleep, I started making sleep a priority, and 7 to 8 hours is what I have to have every night. It makes me super exciting on Friday and Saturday nights. and at events, but I want my sleep, and I've made it a priority that that's what has to happen nearly every day. So, because it starts me good.
Yeah, it's true. It gives you a good platform to start your day on. So, kind of following that, I mean, sleep is obviously one, but what are some other simple things pilots can do on the road to improve, maintain their physical and mental health?
Well, it does come down to, right? They'll say diet, um, which, yeah, I probably got like maybe a C minus in diet, maybe a C in diet. Exercise is another. But those things, exercise, it can be difficult, especially when you're traveling or you get to be, where I'm at, where my knees are not what my mind wants to do and go for a run, my knees are not going to take. Um, so, but now I just focus more on weight training as opposed to cardiovascular, right? It gives you the other thing that gives you is when you're going for a bike ride, when I'll longboard on a skateboard, snowboard in the winter, I ride dirt bikes. It gives me some mindfulness, right? It's like when I'm doing that, I'm engaged in what I'm doing. You kind of have to clear your mind of everything else to be focused on what you're doing, and that helps gives you some mindfulness in processing. Allows me to free think. Some of my better ideas come from when I'm not standing behind this desk and I'm doing something unrelated. Um, so the other is, being on a trip and traveling. Our diet is whatever the hotel or whatever's open and close is serving food. So we don't often get a lot, but that's where sleep comes in. That's where having conversations. That's where having a mental skills program or a coach can come in, because they can help you, give you the tools on how to handle those things when they get to be long or prolonged, or you don't have your baseline.
Yeah, that's true. That's all good stuff. And diet is especially a hard one on the road. That
It
one
is.
we all kind of struggle with. And practicing the mindfulness, like you say, even on the road, maybe it's like taking time to journal or meet with a counselor or something along the lines.
Yeah, or just connecting with your family. The one thing that is real, even in the last 5 years, video conferencing, right, and FaceTime. FaceTime used to be, you know, trying to FaceTime my kids even 7 years ago, 10 years ago, it was nothing but frozen screens, and the data connection just wasn't that good to be able to connect. But seeing somebody face to face, especially kids, family, friends, and having that conversation can really help kind of ground you in what is important,
Yeah, that's
or at
true.
least walk to go get the fried food, right, and walk back.
Yeah, there you go. Um, so, how are some ways you have seen flight departments support individuals' mental health and also integrated into the department's SMS? Obviously, we have those resources, but what are some, maybe a smaller flight department that's not utilizing a big SMS company? How can they still do things to support individuals' mental health?
Well, the first thing, and this would come up a lot when we were talking about fatigue risk management, right? I mean, my department's 23 people, 13 pilots. We have the resources to allow someone to say, hey, I didn't get rest, or hey, I've got this event going on. I can't be on the flight line. But when you're looking at a small department of 2 people, right? How does a small department handle that? And they all start the same way, and that's identifying the risk, because the risk is present whether you're a big department or a small department. But in any risk mitigation process, it's identifying the risk. How is this risk going to affect us? And what are those risks? And once you do that, you've met the first line of the mitigation. So the um, so what we can do is, like, for us, it's if someone is having an issue, like whether, it's, hey, just take some time, but we have the resources to try and cover a trip with another pilot or another crew member. Other departments may not have that. So that's where some of these other programs, or having an ability to talk to someone, have a backup plan. I mean, obviously, you're on small departments, people want to take vacations, they get sick, treat it as that, right? There's a company or a guy I work with in this, he said the Navy has this OBE thing. I'm overcome by events. And once they say that, they're done flying. And that way they don't have to feel like they're airing their dirty laundry, right? It's not that they have to come forward and say that they're having problems at home or what is going on. They're just saying they're overcome by events, and then they're off the line for a little bit. But then that's where coaching or like the FDAP comes in, because that lets them talk to somebody who has experience in this area and can help them to make a determination. Are you going to be open? Are we talking about this, or is this something that you need to be off the line for a little bit and let's continue the conversations? But it starts in the safety policy, because that's what protects the individuals of a department, because that lays out the rules and is signed by that accountable executive saying that, I'm agreeing to this, right? We will let you, if you need to take time, take time. And here's the resources that are available, because they're stipulated later in the manual.
Yeah, I like that, overcome by events, because that was another question, was what are some ways we can make people more comfortable with reporting mental health issues?
And a lot of people they don't want to come forward with it, but that's where that overcome by events, I've even heard distracted by events, to where that says, hey, look, something's going on. I think I'm good to go, but I don't want to air what's going on, but just, keep an eye out. And if you don't think I'm performing well, then we'll go home. But the overcome by events, OBE, or some nomenclature along those lines to let somebody come forward without having to air their laundry. But the resources and the help need to be there as well. It's not so much, hey, go home. It's go home and here's some resources to help you.
Expanding a little bit further on that, another question was, how can we make people more comfortable reporting mental health issues, knowing that it might make them ineligible to get their FAA medical?
Yeah, and that's a challenge. Like I said, the FAA is moving in a direction, because they realize that, right, we say identify the risk, right? Well, it hasn't been good. In one statistic, whether you say 10%, 20% of the pilots flying had met a depression index, right? Well, whether they come forward and they're diagnosed with depression and get the actual help that they need or not, still doesn't change the fact that 10 to 20% of the pilots are meeting a depression index. So what are the treatment options available if you can't come forward? That's where you start getting into risk-taking behaviors. You start getting into substance use disorder or other behaviors that are not really conducive with flying an airplane. So in the end, it would be better to come forward. And the FAA is moving in that direction, and they are addressing depression and anxiety and I believe PTSD as well. There are some that are disqualifying, but it's liberating. You'll feel better, because as we internalize and we're afraid to come forward with whether you have depression, that's just making it worse. Whether that you're having trouble with anxiety, that is making the anxiety even worse. When my friend died by suicide, that opened up a lot of doors and a lot of things from my paramedic days that kind of caused some PTSD type of thoughts, right? And some anger issues and that. And I even stood up at NBAA and during the safety forum, and there were FAA people in the room, and I told them I had to go see the EAP for that. The FAA didn't come up and say, we need your license, right? There is a change, but to comply with the rules right now, that question, have you seen any medical providers? I've heard that question may even kind of be going away. So there is a change. It is coming. That doesn't stop that. If you're struggling, get help. You will feel a lot better right away getting help than sitting and internalizing it, because it's only getting worse. One analogy I think I shared with other names, but in aviation, when we're talking upset recovery, right? It's that spiral. You start turning the plane and the nose starts to drop. So what do? We pull back. Well, that increases the load and that causes the nose to drop. And as we keep over banking and pulling back because we're descending, all we're doing is tightening the spiral. At some point, you just got to go wings level and get all the lift underneath you to come up. And that's what going to get help is about. Make the choice. Just like if you were having a heart attack, it may affect the rest of your career, but if you don't go get help, you could die. And so go get help and then figure out how to get a medical back. And that would be my recommendation.
Yeah, I know when we first were planning this, that was a big conversation that we had where it was like people will, and you know, aviation specifically, will ignore medical issues because they don't want to bring it up on their medical when it could have been something that would easily just be fixed, move on from, but instead you put it off until it's something so severe that it's life threatening. And mental health
And
is the
that's
same way.
and mental health is no different. Mental health overall is you can start getting into, when you're getting into the clinical, you're getting into true imbalances with dopamine, serotonin, norepinephrine, and other things, much like you would as if you were deficient in insulin, right? And so that's what the meds help, is they help to provide that balance. But the other is what are we doing, right? We love to fly. I love to fly. But that's not what defines me. What do I want to do in the end? I want to retire and I want to find a beach or a mountain and I want to hang out with my kids and travel and see the world with them. And if I'm not healthy to do that, what have I done all this for? And that was a question that I had to ask myself. And, I did it on the medical side of it. Super high blood pressure. I was having trouble. I was trying to not have to do it because I didn't want to have to explain it all off. But in the end, it got really bad and I ended up going. And then I said, well, if I got to go get help, I'm going to the best place in the world to go get my medical help. And that was the Mayo Clinic on their pro pilot program, right? Mayo says you're good. The FAA most of the time will say, yeah, you are good. So get good quality help, but don't walk blindly into it, because you can get somebody who writes a term down, that could be a hard fought battle to get erased from a medical record. Get good quality help, and that's where looking at resources. What are psychologists? What are psychiatrists that understand the complexities of aviation, so that if you do send somebody for the professional help, they know what the repercussions are.
All right, let's see. Another question was going a little, not to go super dark here, but do we think that pilot suicide by airplane is a potential flight depart or problem for flight departments?
That I mean, that's what kind of well beyond my scope. But if we look at, um, you know, it is that spiral, and how do we get people to get help and um, to be able to start talking prior, right? And that's where the mental skills programs and the coaching and the mentoring programs and even the flight department assistance program, because part of that flight department assistance program is training others on, you kind of got that peer support, right? It's part of, I believe, the lift effect, and then even our EAP. When everybody is going through that, what do I look for in my peers when to identify if they're having an issue, then that helps to identify these issues. But making help not so punitive will help to keep us away from the catastrophic events.
Yeah, it definitely seems like the FAA is starting to get on the right side of it all, whether it be from COVID or the pilot shortage or whatever might be pushing it. But
Well, the newer generation that's coming up in the ranks is far more open on this. I mean, if you sit around with some of these the even the younger pilots or people that are in their 20s, I mean, they talk about mental health and very openly. And if we're trying to recruit and we want to make sure that we're attracting the great talent and the new talent, we need to be having open dialogues, because they do. So.
yeah, that's a good point. And this all kind of leads into what our safety day is going to be about, which is about employee retention and what flight departments can do. And this is a big thing. Everyone wants to make sure they're feeling safe and open at work and that they can take care of their health. And this is a big part of all of that.
In the most of the programs that I brought up, when you're looking at the coaching, mental skills, mentoring, even the FDAPs, it improves the employees' experience overall, helps them to be even better employees, increase the emotional intelligence, helps to give them more perspective in contributing to the success and the growth of the department. So even on that end, the employer is getting a lot of benefit from that as well. and the employees feel that they're being invested in as well in their development.
Yeah, that's true. That was all the questions that we had. If there was anything else you wanted to add in at the end here, or
I don't. I'll send you the presentation,
yeah,
and then, like I said, lots of other, and there's other providers out there. I know MedAir was putting together some kind of mental health program to be able to take calls related to mental health. These are just companies that I work with that talk to even your SMS providers, talk to your company, talk to your HR, um, talk to your insurance provider, and see what they offer.
yeah, those are all awesome. We really appreciate you talking to everybody. I know it's a topic that's at the forefront of a lot of people's minds nowadays. And like I said, all this kind of plays into the CABAA Safety next event, which will be our Safety Day in September 27th. We're actually going to have Dr. Quay Snyder as one of our presenters, as well as an SMS panel and MedAir. So kind of all of the above.
They're much better than I am, but and then there'll be more. I know at base this year, we will be at one of the National Safety Forum conversations will be on this very topic, and it'll be the most up to date changes that are happening even within the FAA. So.
Yeah, that's fantastic. We're going to have Dr. Quay Snyder speaking on this topic, a little bit more from the health side as far as an AME's perspective. This was definitely much more from what we can do as a flight department, as a pilot specifically, which you have been fantastic to speak on. And as Greg said, I'm going to be sending out a recorded session to everybody who registered of this webinar. We will also include the link for the video. We just were having audio issues with it sharing, so we'll make sure it's sent in that link as well. And we can also send all of this list of external resources so that people have a go-to list that we can include to send to everybody.
Thank you.
And with that, we'll finish up for the day. Thank you so much, Greg. I know this was a very popular one. We had the most attendees for this webinar than we've had for any in the last few years. So we're very excited to have you, and we appreciate you being here.
Thank you. I hope it was beneficial. Thank you.
Definitely. The conversation itself is a big part of it. We're definitely happy to keep talking about it.
Good.
All
Bye,
right.
everybody.
Thanks so much. Have a good day, everyone.